Okay, what we're going to do now is attack services. So we're going to actually attack a service that's had a lot of vulnerabilities in it, and it's good to see because we're going to do it old school. We're actually going to do it with the file. We're not going to actually use Metasploit. We can, but we want to do it the other way, so you see that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an actual scan of a box, and we'll save the time here, and we're just going to do a port scan of the box, and the box is going to be 177.136. As you see here, look what's open, FTP, File Transfer Protocol, SSH. So we need to know what versions are there so we can start looking for vulnerabilities. So we'll go and we'll do what's called services scan. So now what we'll do is go try to dump everything we can from this target. And we'll expand our box out here a little bit so we can see it a little better. And let Nmap run. Now remember, you get a live update of Nmap, just hit the space bar and it'll tell us where it's at in the process. So it's getting there. So we've got a lot of services on this box. Well, this is a services attack type of environment, so we want to make sure we have some services for you to get an example of what you'd do in an attack. So what we're doing here is we're actually going to go after this FTP box, this FTP service on the actual thing. So, where we're at in the process, 88%, so still running, trying to get that information from the box. So what we're looking at here is FTP. What we could have done is just look at the ports themselves instead of go through every port, and we might do that momentarily. So what we could do here is, since we're waiting and still waiting, love the Nmap because Nmap you can do a multi-threaded scan. So we'll do another scan on just port 21. And just grab one port. Now this is what we want right there. Woo FTP daemon woo-2.6.0. This is the Washington University FTP daemon. Now, we have several different methods we can do to actually get access and find out more about this vulnerability. We've had some vulnerability sites we've talked about, so we could search on the internet, right? We could do an internet search and get the actual vulnerability there. What else could we do? Well, we can use tools within our actual environment itself. So what we can do is we can use the tools to look for a vulnerability. So let's do that now. We'll go back over here and look. There's scan finished. Now it's still going. That's why we went back and we only looked for one port. So now I'll clear the screen, get it looking nice and pretty again. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to go into okay, so where is it at on the new? So here, let me do a find because Kali Linux moves some things around for us. So let's do a find and look for search exploit. User bin search exploit. So we don't have to go look for it like we used to in the old days. Okay, that's interesting. There's what we want, user share. So they've put everything under user share now, which is more of a type of Unix, Linux environment. So it's kind of nice that they're going back to traditional. So now let's go cd/user/share/exploitdb. Now this is where we have search exploit. So now we just do a /search exploit woo FTP remote. Now look at all the actual attacks we have against the woo FTP. So what we want to do is we want to look for a good exploit. We normally want to look for what? A remote exploit. A remote root exploit works the best. So what we like to do is we like to find the ones that give us the capability to access the server remotely and actually do an actual attack. And that's what we can do. So what we can do is we can actually look at this Woo exploit and see if we can compile it and build it and actually get the thing to work. And that's what we do when we do these. You have to experiment and try. Okay? Before we exploit it, we could see if anonymous is allowed on that FTP server. So let's go back over here to our Nmap scan's done now. And we do an FTP and we go to that 192.168.177.136. See if it connects. It did. And there it is. It's called ftp.bigfiles.com, FTP server, version Woo 2.6.0. So, there's some cool things we can do here, right? So now what we want to do is what? Let's see if anonymous is allowed. Okay, anonymous is enabled. Password, remember anonymous, you just send anything. Ah, look, guest logged in, but access restrictions apply. And it was smart enough to know we should have used our email address as our password. But in this case, we didn't do that. So that's okay. There's different things we can do when we set these types of things up. Okay? So now what we're going to do, we'll try to write. So let's put a file. So let's just do an ls. Yeah, there we got. Let's do a pwd. pwd. So we've got some information here and available that we can use and start to try to leverage. And sometimes we just want to exploit. Yeah. Sometimes you just want to exploit. So let's just look at the exploitation. So when we go in here now, we got a remote root exploit here. We got one here, and we got one here. What version of FTP server do we have? 2.6.0. And then the 1. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go in, and we're going to look at some of this code. So how do we get to this code? Well, we've got this one here, remote root exploit. So let's go there. So we'll go cd platforms ls, bunches of platforms, yeah? So we go back up and we look at our code. It's Linux, right? So we've got an actual Linux remote 348.c. So let's see if we can remember that. cd Linux, cd remote. Now these are all the Linux executable and text files that are all vulnerabilities. So what we want to do is we want to do an ls of 348.c. Make sure it's there. It is. Do a more of 348.c. There it is. This is actually the program. Okay? Fix the chroot break on Linux. So chrooted is how we protect the FTP server. But you see here, the hacker who wrote this code actually got around that chroot jail. And that's what we call that, a chroot jail. Okay. So, cool stuff. Now, what do we do from here? Well, we have to compile it. We have to build it. We have to play programmers. So this is why you always have to have a little bit of experience in programming. It always helps. The more you know about programming, the better you'll be as a red team member. Because there's always going to be code somewhere that we have to try to figure out or write code on our own. Right? So there's different things we can do. So now what we want to do is we want to actually go in here and copy this 348.c. You don't want to leave 348.c in this file or this folder and then do all your changes, modify it, mangle it, and then you don't have a good 348.c anymore. So what we do is we go and we cp 348.c and we cc it or cp it to /opt. We probably don't have a directory there yet, so we'll have to make one, but let's check. Oh, no, there is. So if we go cd now, /opt, /explits, ls, okay, that's what it did. It called it exploit. So if we actually do our exploits now, if we more exploits, that's the new name of the file. Okay, so there's not a directory there. So we'll make a directory, make dir exploits. So we want to keep our exploits in one actual place. Oh, we got to actually call it exploit. There we go. CP exploits into exploit slash, we'll call it woo ftp.c. Okay, now we do cd exploit ls, and there's our woo ftp.c. So now we have the program there, but what do we do from here? Well, you got to know programming. If you don't know programming, it can be a little bit tough. So this is why we always tell and you teach people they have to know programming, okay? Different types of things. So we have to compile it. So how do we compile it? Well, we have to use GCC or another compiler to compile it. And what you have to do is you have to know the syntax. So let's see if we get it right here, because we'll just actually try to compile it. So if we do a GCC, a -o for the output option, and we give it the name, so we'll call it hack. So it's our hack, and our C file is woo-ftp.c. If all goes well, we get our command prompt back. So now we're doing ls. See, now we have this program called hack. So now what we want to do is we want to know how to use the hack program. Well, what do we do when we want to learn how to use something? We do a ./hack-h. Hopefully the hacker has given us a reference on how to use it. And look, this hacker has actually given us a great reference on how to use this tool, which is good. That's what hackers should do. So as you see here is, if you go over here, we actually have ./hack, right? So -a for anonymous, so we're going to use the anonymous logon, which it says right here, auto target mode banner, and we're going to do a -d for destination, and we're going to do the IP address of the target. Now, remember, exploitation is not 100%, but this is the syntax, according to here, that we can use to try to actually get the remote root exploit on the Washington University FTP daemon service. So now he's trying to log in. There he goes, and look, we have a shell. User ID equals 0, which is root. Linux base. So if we do an ls, this tells us the actual directories. So we are in the actual box. So we're root. So we've got a root shell on the box, but does this look like a shell or anything you've ever seen before? This is what we call a very limited shell. So even though we got the hack, the exploit worked against this woo FTP daemon, this is all we have for a shell. It's quite limited in what it can do. So now you got to start using your imagination. So this is where you really got to start thinking like a red team hacker does when we do this type of stuff. Because we could try some different types of things to try to do. We could try to use TFTP, set up a TFTP server and TFTP to it. We could FTP it, right? We could send files back to us. What about that? We could use FTP. We could actually FTP back to us and connect to it because we know anonymous FTP is working, right? Because we've already logged into anonymous FTP. So if we come back over here and we get back on our shell and we go and we do an FTP into the box, hopefully it'll respond. Remember, we've been hacking it a little bit here. Anonymous. And there we go. Now we do an ls, right? And there we go. We got an FTP folder, which is pub. So the pub folder is where the FTP stuff is. So let's see if we can cd into pub. We did. And as you see, there's really nothing in pub. But what can we do? Well, you got to use your imagination a little bit. We have a shell, a root level shell on the box. So what we have to do is we have to use our head. Think about it. What we can do is, well, we've got a root shell on the box. Can't do a whole lot because it's a limited shell. But what we can do is try to use that to pilfer information. So what's some good pilfering information we can pilfer from a Unix or Linux machine? How about the password file? Yeah, the password file, etc password, etc shadow. So if we go back to our exploited box, what if we do this? We know we're in actual pub, right? So if we do a cp/etc/password, which is the password file, home/ftp/pub, and we call it password. How do we know that directory? Remember our lab? Remember building a lab and range and setting up a target range and setting up a lab and practice. And when you think you're done practicing, go practice some more. This is how we learn this. We learned that this is Washington University FTP. This is where it stores that actual password. Now you're probably freaking out because it doesn't give us any feedback. Why? It's not going to give us any feedback. It's a limited shell. It's not going to tell us much of anything. So now we want to do a cp/etc/password to home/ftp/pub/password. And we want the shadow file. We've already got the password file, so let's get the shadow file. Now, we don't know if this worked or not. There's no indication it worked. So what can we do? We can do an ls/home/ftp/pub, and there it is. There's our password file and our shadow file now located in the public FTP directory. And we have access to the public FTP directory because, you got it, we've been doing our homework and we know we have anonymous access to this FTP server. So when we click over here and we've got this, and now we do an ls, you see our password and our shadow file? There they are. So now all we have to do is FTP this is get, right? So we've FTP it, so we got a put or a get. So we're not going to put here, we're going to get, and what are we going to get? We're going to get password, and we're going to get shadow. And now we're going to exit our FTP connection, and look what we have here. We have the password file and we have the shadow file. So now we have the password file and the shadow file. We have to try to crack these. So now that we have to crack it, what we're going to do is we're going to use John the Ripper. So we just enter John and then put in our password files. As you see, he detected the actual hashes and he's loaded the hashes and he's loading different password hashes with different salts. So now it's just a matter of time where John the Ripper will run through and crack the passwords that we've copied from the actual machine we compromised running the Washington University FTP daemon. We could also use user add users and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things we can do once we have this box. Remember, the shell we have is only a limited shell. So a lot of times when we attack a service, if it gives us a limited shell, in this case it's cherooted, in a cherooted environment, we have a limited shell. So we have to do other things to try to get information from the box. So as you see, John's sitting there and he's crunching away on these password hashes and these different salts, and it's a matter of time. And given enough time, usually they'll go through and crack the resources, but you get the idea, you get the process. And this concludes the lab on attacking services. We've attacked the Washington University FTP daemon service, successfully gained a shell, and successfully used anonymous FTP to transfer files from the attacked service.